All right, welcome to the Chapter 14 Flipped Classroom. If we looked at the elections and how a president is elected, qualifications, benefits in Chapter 13, we're going to be looking at the powers of the president that are given to him in the Constitution. So how much power should the president have? One of the concepts that we focus in on is the growth of presidential power. If you look at President Washington, he basically, had the powers of the president that are dictated in the Constitution. But you also have to realize the citizenry in 1789 did not expect that much from the federal government. So the person who's in charge of executing the laws really didn't have a lot to do compared to today. But today, we expect more from the government. If there's a hurricane, we expect FEMA to show up and help. If there is a situation in which many Americans today will look to the federal government to solve its problems. So thus, the federal government has to do more. Remember that quote we saw in our activity on Tuesday, though the people support the government should not support the people. That's President Cleveland from 1887, clearly an outdated model considering what the government does for the people today. We have two perfect examples of how presidents view their power. First, we have, in order of chronology, Teddy Roosevelt. TR basically felt as if the Constitution said the president cannot do this, he said, okay, I can't do that. Short of that, he basically could do whatever he wanted. So obviously that's a growth of power. Taft had, his predecessor, Taft, believed that he can only do what the Constitution said the president could do. So very limited a view of presidential power. Again, can only do what the Constitution says they can do. TRs had a very expanded power. You're allowed to do whatever the Constitution did not forbid you to do. In essence, what we're going to be looking at is the potion of power that the president has. Most of the power sits in what is called the executive powers, fulfilling his job. But he also has a few legislative powers and a few judicial powers. Now those are sewn up with the concept of checks and balances. But first, let's look at the specifics. If we look at the executive powers, the president has the authority and the power to execute the law. If Congress passes a law, it is the president's job to follow through on that. He also has ordinance power. He's in charge of all 15 departments and many agencies. For example, if he feels that he wants to follow through on one of his jobs a certain way, he will give an order, because rarely does he actually follow through and do any of the specifics. He's on the top of the triangle, and he will give an order to the people who are below him, and those are the people who are actually following through and executing the law. We call that ordinance power if he gives an order. For example, in 1986, I believe, President Reagan made an order to not allow abortions on any military bases of the United States throughout the world. Now, granted, there's probably not very many of them, but he made an order, and as commander-in-chief, he's allowed to make that order. And everybody below him says, yes, sir, no problem. In 1993, January 20th, 1993, President Clinton was sworn into office. He rescinded Reagan's executive order and signed a new executive order allowing abortions to be done on military bases. Again, president looking down on the triangle to his Secretary of Defense saying abortions are allowed to occur on military bases. In 2001, when George W. Bush came into office, he signed a different executive order rescinding that and again banning them. And shockingly, in 2009, when Obama took office, one of the first things he did was sign an executive order allowing abortions to occur on military bases. Again, giving an order. Appointment power is given to the president to choose anybody he wants to fill in on cabinet posts, ambassadorships, and on any federal court openings, whether it's Supreme Court, Appellate Court, or District Court. He can even fire any cabinet member or anybody who works in the bureaucracy. So that we call that removal power. That was a big deal back when the country was first founded. The Congress or the Senate felt that if a president fired somebody, the Senate would have to agree, because when the president wants to hire somebody, the Senate has to agree. So why shouldn't they agree to have to fire them? In the end, it was decided the president has the power to remove somebody from office, and you serve at the pleasure of the president. That's the saying. And diplomatic powers, of course, the president is executing the diplomacy of the United States. So that could be signing treaties, having the power of recognition, when you recognize a country, when they declare independence. That's a diplomatic power, as well as signing executive agreements. If you want to sign a treaty with a country, you have to have it ratified by the Senate by 2/3. For example, the Treaty of Versailles ending World War I was never signed by the Senate. So they had to sign a separate piece with each country because the Senate would not sign the Treaty of Versailles. There is another avenue called the executive agreement, and that's an agreement between two executives, two heads of state, hence the executive agreement. That does not need to be ratified by the Senate. And the power of recognition we just talked about. The military power is all the power of the military sits in the hands of the president. His ultimate authority because he is the commander-in-chief. That has been curtailed because, of course, the Congress has the power to declare war, but they even made it more difficult when they passed the War Powers Resolution, which basically said that if the president puts the military in any situation, he has to advise Congress within 72 hours, 3 days, and they have to promise to get out within 60 days, and if they want to be returned earlier, they have to have congressional authority. And again, it's another check. If you look at the power of the president, that has nothing to do with the executive branch, more legislative or judicial powers. The president does have some, though very few, legislative powers. And that is, he can recommend legislation. If he feels like a law needs to be passed, like curtailing guns, he has the power to recommend legislation. Of course, the House and the Senate still have to vote on it, but he can recommend it. If he doesn't like a bill that has been passed in the House and the Senate, he can always veto it. And again, if you're saying no to a bill, that's a legislative power. And there is no line item veto for the President of the United States. Many governors have this concept of line item veto. It is the ability to strike out a portion of a bill, such as a piece of pork, of bacon, that's expensive, to coax other legislatures to say yes to a bill. Sometimes there's a piece of pork or fat, which might be building a library in your district. A line item veto will allow the president to strike out that appropriation, that spending, to save money, but still saying yes to the original bill. That is called the line item veto. Congress passed it, and President Clinton used it once. Then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that it is that it was unconstitutional. So now we move to judicial powers. What we're going to be looking at here is the president has the ability to pardon people who have committed federal crimes. Pardon means to erase the charge, as if the charge never occurred. Reprieve is to postpone the punishment of somebody who committed a federal crime. And amnesty is to basically pardon a whole group of people. Again, what you're acting as here is a judge, hence the judicial powers of the president. All right, those are the powers of the president. Our next Flipped Classroom will look at the bureaucracy, how the execution of the law is actually implemented.